And we are back with part 2 of this week's reading of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible, Tree of Life version. And we are going to, we're actually have done Nahum. Now we're doing Habakkuk. And I'm still finishing the introduction of Habakkuk. Then we're going to read the actual chapters in Habakkuk, then Zephaniah and Haggai. So the burden of Habakkuk is actually chapter 1, and the structure of this book comes from the first thoughts of each chapter. Habakkuk was possessed with a sense of justice that would not allow him to ignore the rampant unrighteousness around him. So from Habakkuk, we learn that we should bring the major questions that challenge our lives to the one who created us and gave us life. Habakkuk lived during one of Judah's most critical times, when the nation had fallen from the heights of Josiah's reforms to the depths of violent treatment of its citizens, as well as oppressive measures against the poor and the collapse of the legal system. So the world around Judah was at war, and Babylon was rising to overcome Assyria and Egypt, and the threat of an invasion by the Babylonians from the north added to Judah's internal turmoil. So given this background, it is believed that Habakkuk wrote sometime between the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC and the fall of Jerusalem in 587 to 586 BC. So Habakkuk prophesied to Judah. Well, and as we know, Jeremiah did as well. But he actually prophesied concerning the impending invasion of the Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians. And the nation of Judah was scarred with moral and spiritual decline. Habakkuk was a man of a deeply tender nature and spiritual character. He manifested a great love for his people, and like Ezekiel, he served as a watchman over them. So Habakkuk questions and the doubts arose from his jealousy for the holiness and justice of God. The book of Habakkuk gives the account of a spiritual journey of one man's pilgrimage from doubt to worship, and the prophet was perplexed over God's permission of evil in Judah. He was also concerned over God's silence. Even more so, the prophet could not understand why God would allow a wicked nation such as Babylon to be used as a rod of correction against Judah. And we're going to see that as we read the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk battled with much of the same problem that Job and the writer of Psalm 73 had. Um, the fact that while God's people suffer, the wicked go free. So current events faced Habakkuk with this particular problem that was happening right there in front of his eyes. So in the first 4 verses, Habakkuk was overwhelmed by everything going on around him. He could think of nothing but the iniquity and violence that he saw among his people. Although Habakkuk addressed God with his questions, he believed that God had removed himself from the earthly scene. He believed that God had forgotten his own words and that his hand was not present. Habakkuk argued that God was nowhere to be found and that evil men were in control. And then as we move into chapter 2, Habakkuk's vision, God had given Habakkuk a wonderful vision in Habakkuk 2. We're going to read about that. God made 2 great pledges to Habakkuk. So we're gonna read about that, and then Habakkuk's prayers, which begin with an appeal for revival. And the prophet praises God for his works in the past, and we see the expression of joy, the joy of salvation, and he also demonstrated that when things look at their worst, we can still rejoice in the Lord at our best. And the prophet teaches us also that we need to cast our burdens on Adonai, then wait on him. God will surely answer if we wait on him. We can and we shall rejoice in spite of our circumstances. Habakkuk was a prophet with a love for his people and a heavy burden for them as well. So even though he was overwhelmed with concern when he addressed God, we will see as we read, you know, a new Habakkuk by the end of the book of Habakkuk. He was no longer controlled by anxiety over the circumstances and the situation that faced Judah. So when God spoke to Habakkuk, the prophet raised his spiritual sights, and temporal or worldly affairs no longer controlled him. So Habakkuk set his thoughts and affections on things above. This is what we're told to do. Yeshua told us to set our sights on things above. Our treasures should be in heaven, not on earth here, where things can be, rust can corrupt, moths can eat it. Yeshua said these very things. This is kind of a type and shadow of what Yeshua actually was teaching the people when he was doing his ministry here on earth. Instead of being ruled by worldly problems, Habakkuk set his sights on God, for he realized that God does concern himself with his people. God is the source of our strength, and he promised never to leave us or forsake us. Yeshua. Again, Habakkuk discovered that he was made to walk on higher ground. So this book teaches us that we can rise above our circumstances. We can even rejoice in our circumstances if we keep our focus on God. And as we think back to the book of Job, also, which we need to remember that Job also mirrored a lot of this as well. The turning point in Habakkuk's life was when God spoke to him and gave him a revelation that still blesses us today. Many years after Habakkuk, the Apostle Paul took the words of the prophet and made them the foundation stone of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Yeshua. Paul reminded us that Yeshua is the answer to human needs, and only Yeshua can cleanse us from sin, restore us to a right relationship with God the Father, and give us hope for the future. And we're actually going to cover the book of Job when we get into the Ketuvim, and you're going to actually see what how this also mirrors what Habakkuk went through, and how Job um, does not give up his faith even in the face of everything that he endures. So we're going to get into that also when we get into the Ketuvim. But for now, we're going to read the 3 chapters in Habakkuk. Chapter 1, Burden for Justice in Judah, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. How long, Adonai, have I cried for help, yet you do not hear? I cry out to you, violence, yet you do not deliver. Why do you show me wickedness, and why must I behold mischief? Yes, devastation and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore Torah has no effect, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked encircle the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted. Adonai's answer, Chaldeans. Look, among the nations observe. Astonish yourself, be astounded, for a work is being done in your days. You will not believe it if it were told. For I am about to raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter, impetuous nation, marching all over the land to seize dwellings not its own, dreadful and terrifying, its justice and dignity derived from itself. Its horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Its horsemen come galloping, its horsemen are coming from afar. They fly like a vulture, swooping down to eat. All of them come for violence. An assembling of faces to the east. He gathers captives like sand. He scoffs at kings, and rulers are a joke to him. He laughs at every stronghold. He heaps up dirt and takes it. Then a wind sweeps through and passes on. He is guilty. This is his strength, is his God, little g God. Appeal for justice on Chaldea. Are not you from an antiquity? Adonai, my God, my Holy One, we will not die. Adonai, you have ordained him for judgment, as you, O rock, have established him to chasten. With eyes too pure to see evil, you cannot look at such trouble. Why do you look at the treacherous? Why do you remain silent when a wicked one swallows up those more righteous than him? You made man like the fish of the sea, like a creeping thing, with no one ruling over him. He brings up all with hook and jaw, drags away in his dragnet, or gathers with his fishing net. Therefore he rejoices with glee. Therefore he sacrifices to his dragnet, and offers incense to his fishing net. For through them his portion is rich, and his food abundant. Will he empty his net for this reason, continually slaying nations with no compassion? In chapter 2, I will take my stand at my post, and station myself on the rampart, and I will watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer regarding my argument. Then the vision for an appointed time. Then Adonai answered me and said, write down the vision, make it plain on the tablets, so that the reader may run with it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. It hastens to the end and will not fail. If it should be slow in coming, wait for it will surely come. It will not delay. I want to pause here for just a moment. So in this section, we actually pick out the 4 keys to hearing God's voice and to being able to communicate with God. Number 1 is we need to quiet ourselves so we can hear God's voice. So Habakkuk removed himself, stood on his rampart, he quieted himself and waited for God to answer him. We also need to recognize God's voice as spontaneous thoughts that light upon your mind. And thirdly, look for vision as we pray. Fourth, write down the flow of thoughts and pictures that come to you. God may give us vision, God may give us dreams. And this is where two-way journaling comes into play, and we can actually we can look back and see this, and actually see what God is saying to us. And there could be a pattern as well. When you get used to doing that and you get used to journaling things, you know, he may be telling you the same thing quite a few days in a row. And that's something that you need to really pay attention to. So those are 4 basic keys actually to hearing God's voice, to communing with God. And again, let's read this in Habakkuk because this is very important. I will take my stand at my post and station myself on the rampart. So he has selected a place where he was going to be. So we think about your prayer closet, where you go to pray, where you're going to be quiet with God. Um, and I will watch to see what he will say to me. So he's focusing, he's centering, he's waiting for God. And what I will answer regarding my argument. Then Adonai answered me and said, write down the vision, make it plain on the tablets, so that the reader may run with it, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. It hastens to the end and will not fail. If it should be slow in coming, wait for it will surely come. It will not delay. The next section is trust, judgment, and glory. Behold the puffed up one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his trust. Indeed, because this one betrays, a proud man never rests. He enlarges his desire like Sheol, like death he is never satisfied, so he gathers to himself all nations and collects all peoples for himself. Will not all take up a proverb against him, or a scornful riddle about him? Oi, to one expanding what isn't his, how long? Oi, to one burdening himself with heavy debts. Will biting you arise suddenly, and those shaking you awaken, as you will become plunder for them? Since you looted many nations, all the survivors will plunder you. because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, the city, and all its inhabitants. Oi to one surely getting unjust gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to escape the reach of calamity. You schemed shame for your house by cutting off many peoples, so going wrong yourself. For a stone will cry out from a wall, and wooden beams will answer. Oi, to him who builds a city by bloodshed and establishes a town with injustice. Behold, it is not from Adonai Sabaoth that peoples toil to fuel a fire and nations exhaust themselves for emptiness. For the earth will be filled with knowing the glory of Adonai as the waters cover the sea. Oi to one who makes his neighbor drink, who pours out your fury, or even making him drunk in order to gaze at his nakedness. You are filled with disgrace rather than glory. Drink, you too, and be uncircumcised. The cup of Adonai's right hand will surround you, and disgrace will come upon your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will spread over you, destruction of breasts terrifying them, because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, the city, and to all its inhabitants. What use is an idol when its craftsman has carved it? Or a middle image, a teacher of lies? For a craftsman has trusted in the image that he created to make dumb idols. Oi to one who says to the wood, awake, to a dumb stone, rouse yourself. Can it teach? Look, it is plated with gold and silver, but it has no spirit within it. But Adonai is in his holy temple. Let all the land be silent before him. And we have a bunch of footnotes here. Revelation chapter 1, verse 19 says, therefore, write down what you have seen, what is, and what will happen after these things. So here, God actually was instructing John to write down what the vision that was given to him as well. Romans 1:17 says, in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from trust to trust, as it is written, but the righteous shall live by emunah, and emunah is faith. And then there is Hebrews 10, verses 37 to 38 is also parallel. This is in the New Covenant, the Brit Hadashah. But remember the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a great struggle with sufferings. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to abuses and afflictions, and other times you became partners with those who were treated this way. I'm sorry, that is verses 32 to 33, and also in 37 to 38. For yet in a very little while the coming one will come, and he will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by emunah, and that is faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul takes no pleasure in him. So again, waiting on the will of God here is depicted in Hebrews. And also writing down the vision or the Rhema word that God gives to you. And as in Habakkuk, he said in the second chapter, 11th verse, so a stone will cry out from a wall, and wonder beams will answer. In Luke chapter 19, verse 40, we read, but answering Yeshua said, I tell you that if these keep silent, the stones will shout out. So those are the footnotes for chapter 2 of Habakkuk. So we go on to chapter 3 of Habakkuk, Habakkuk's confidence in Adonai, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet as a passionate song. Adonai, I have heard the report about you, and I have come to fear. Adonai, revive your work throughout the years. Throughout the years, make it known to wrath, remember compassion. God, come from Teman, and the Holy One from the mountain, Mount Paran, Selah. His majesty covers the heavens, and his praises fill the earth with brilliance like light. Rays emanate from his hand. There his power was hidden. Pestilence goes before him, a fiery bolt goes forth at his feet. He stood, and the earth shook. He looked, and startled nations. Ancient mountains were shattered. Hills of antiquity sank down. His ways are everlasting. I saw tents of Cushan under calamity, the curtains of the land of Midian. are trembling. Adonai, is your wrath against rivers, or your anger at the rivers? Or is your fury with the sea? For you ride on your horses, your chariots of salvation, your your bow is laid bare, sworn are rods, a decree, Selah. You cleave the land with rivers, the mountains saw you and writhe. A downpour of water overflows, the deep gives its voice, it lifts up hands high. Sun and moon stand in lofty abode. At the flash of your arrows they go, at the radiance of the lightning of your spear. With indignation you pace the land, with anger you thrash nations. You went out for salvation of your people, for the deliverance of your anointed one. You shatter the head of the house of the wicked to lay it bare from foundation up to the top. Selah. You have pierced his chief rulers with his own staff. They storm in to scatter me. Their exultation is like devouring the weak in secret. You marched forth, your horses in the sea, much water foaming. I heard, and my belly trembled, my lips quivered at the sound. Decay comes into my bones, I tremble where I stand, since I must wait quietly for a day of distress to come up against the people who will invade us. Though the fig tree does not blossom, and there is no yield in the vines, though the olive crop fail, and the fields produce no food, the flock is cut off from the fold, and there is no cattle in the stalls, yet will I triumph in Adonai. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Adonai, my Lord, is my strength. He has made my feet like a deer's, and will make me walk on my high places. And this is for the choir director on my stringed instruments. And one of the footnotes to chapter 3 is Acts chapter 13, verse 26. Brothers, sons of the family of Abraham, and those among you who are God-fearers, it is to us the message of this salvation has been sent. And Luke 1, verse 47, and my spirit greatly rejoices in God, my Savior. And the last verse that is in the footnotes is Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. And that's the end of Habakkuk. So I'm going to pause it here, and then we're going to come back with Zephaniah and Haggai. Zephaniah, again, is only 3 chapters, and Haggai is only 2 chapters.